Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. So once upon a time, a long time ago, I made a video called Intro to Knife Making, in which I forged this knife here from a piece of rebar. Now, as its name kind of implies, that video was intended to be the first in a series of knife-making videos, the rest of which I never got around to making until today. So today I'm going to be forging a simple hunting knife or something along those lines. The process is going to be pretty similar to what I already demonstrated in the introductory video. The main difference is that instead of starting with rebar, we'll be using 4140 alloy steel. Now, 4140 is not classified as a tool steel per se, but it is a very good general purpose alloy steel. It costs more than rebar, but it's still pretty affordable. You know, I'm starting with this 6-inch piece of 1/2-inch diameter round stock, and this cost about $1. With the right heat treatment, 4140 has a very high tensile strength, so that will produce a knife that can take a lot of abuse without breaking. Edge retention is not going to be as good as some high-end tool steels, but it'll be a lot better than rebar, and we'll still have a knife that is fairly easy to sharpen and will take a sharp edge. So, without further ado, let's get started. To start with, I'll forge the rough shape of the blade, and then once I've got it in the shape that I want it, I'll just let it slowly air cool, which will basically anneal the steel, leaving it fairly soft so I can work with it easily. Next, I'll use an angle grinder to finish shaping the blade, and I'll drill a couple of 3/16 holes in the tang to facilitate attachment of a handle later. Then, to harden the steel, I will put the knife back in the fire, heat it until it glows bright orange, and quench it in used motor oil. I polish the oxide scale from the heat treatment off of the hardened blade with a flap wheel on my angle grinder. And then I use a plumbing torch to reheat the blade until oxide just starts to form again. This controlled heating should temper the steel. I take a piece of branch from a hardwood tree, in this case mountain mahogany, and hew it down to a roughly rectangular shape, which I then plane smooth and cut in half to make the handle for the knife. I drill some holes in the handle to match the holes in the tang, and then I'll attach the handle to the knife with a couple pieces of 3/16 outer diameter by 1/8 inch inner diameter stainless steel tubing that I insert through the holes and then flare the ends using a center punch to act as rivets that'll hold the handle on. Before final assembly, I apply a little bit of epoxy to the handle to act as a bedding compound and improve the fit between the wood and the steel. There are any number of ways to do the final shaping of the wooden handle, but in this case I chose to use a flap wheel with my angle grinder and then do the finish sanding by hand and apply a Danish oil finish. After a final sharpening, the knife itself is complete, but a knife like this deserves a good belt sheath. To start with, I just fold some paper around the knife, kind of in the form of the sheath that I want to make, and then I can cut out the paper to use as a template for cutting some leather to make the sheath. However, when I transfer the pattern from the paper to the leather, I always like to add a little margin for error all the way around. I figure if I have a little extra leather when I'm done, I can always trim it off at the end, but if I come up short, I may have to start over. Once I've cut out the piece of leather that I'll be using, I soak it for a few minutes in warm water to render it supple. Then I just fold it around the knife into the shape of the sheath that I want, punch a few holes for rivets, and fasten it all together. So I'm really pleased with how this knife turned out, but I made it really as a demonstration piece, not for any particular application. And so it occurred to me that maybe a good application for it would be to send it out to one of my Patreon supporters as a token of my appreciation. You may or may not be aware that I have a Patreon page because I don't talk about it all that much. I don't want to become one of these channels that spends the last half of every episode trying to drum up more financial support from their viewers. That said, I am really thankful for the faithful few who've taken the initiative to support this channel through Patreon. Of course, financially, every little bit helps. And perhaps even more significant than that is just the moral support of knowing that there's people who consider the content that I present important enough to be worth supporting financially. Anyway, so I've got a list here of the people who support me on Patreon, numbered in no particular order. My hat's off to you guys, and I have numbers corresponding to the list on these wooden chips. I'm going to draw one out of my hat, and it looks like I will be sending this knife to Mark Bradley. So, Mark, we can get in touch through Patreon so that I can get your shipping address and get this sent off to you. And again, to all of you, thank you for your support. And to the rest of you, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.